Hey, it's Chris, and in this video, I'm going to be going over the playlist in FL Studio, some hotkeys, and my methods for having a fluid workflow within the playlist. This is the second video in a series where I review the basics in FL Studio for absolute beginners. If you haven't seen that first episode, I'll leave a link in the description to that playlist so you can go check it out. All right, let's get right into it. All right, so we're in FL Studio, we're in the playlist right now. And I pulled up my song Get That, which is going to be out on December 8th if you want to check that out. I'll leave a link in the description as well. And I'm just going to start from the top and just kind of give a rough overview of some things that you might want to be aware of. So right here, you've got your drop-down menu at the very top left, and it just has some options for you. I'm not going to get too much into that right now, but you can go over that. The main thing that you want to be aware of is anytime there's like an option that you want to do, the hotkeys are right next to it right here if you want to just look at that so you can have a shortcut to do the things that you want to do. But I'm going to show you some hotkeys anyway, and the ones that I use and that I think are really essential for a fluid workflow inside the playlist. So right next to the drop-down menu, you've got your snap to grid. You click on that, and this changes how many beats that you can see. So if we zoom in right now, it's on beat. So the biggest one you can do is bar. So if you zoom in, you've got these numbers at the top. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and those are your bars. That's just how music is broken up into sections. It's broken up by bars or measures. And so if we just highlight one of these bars and we just zoom into it, you can see your snap to grid. If you go to beat, then it breaks each individual bar up into these 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then you can subdivide those beats even further. So you can do each of the 4 beats within the bar, you can cut that in half, which then gives you 8 beats within a bar. And then you can do it into threes and so on all the way up until like you can get these tiny, ridiculously small things. This first option right here is the draw tool. That's going to allow you to just plug stuff in like this. And in order for you to erase, you can right click and it turns your draw tool into the erase tool. And actually this delete tool, this erase tool is right here. But if you just right click, you can literally just click something in and then right click and then delete it. Here we've got this paintbrush tool, which is basically the same thing as the draw tool, but you can click, and if you hold down the click and you just drag, then it just paints, and you can just drag it across and it'll just keep adding it for however many subdivisions you had. Okay, so the next one is the delete tool, which I already went over. You don't really need to use that tool. You can just right click. You've got this mute tool. You can just click the mute tool and just click on whatever it is and it mutes it, right? And you can see that it's muted because it has that X right there. And then whenever you click back on it, the X goes away. Okay, so this slip tool. The slip tool is interesting. So you can go into these little audio clips or basically anything. You can do it in MIDI as well. And you go in there and you can literally drag what's inside of a clip. You can slip it, right? You can just slip it over and drag it across. So let's say right here it says get that.
Get that.
Let's say I want to drag it to a different part of the vocal, right? I just slip it over.
Yeah. Then let me
See?
get that. Get that.
So that's what the slip tool does. The slice tool. So the slice tool is kind of funny. By default, you click on the slice and you see this little thing which slices any kind of clip or MIDI in half like that, right? And now this is 2 separate parts. But what's weird is that by default, it does this little windmill thing where it spins around like that. And that's so, I guess, so if you start here and you want to cut in the middle of this beat right here, you can kind of click up and then drag over to this section and it'll cut it in the middle. And that's not really helpful for me because I like to just cut it exactly where I want to cut it. So whenever I'm using the cut tool, I'm always holding down shift because whenever you hold down shift, it doesn't do the windmill thing anymore. Then what it does is it literally snaps to the grid and it cuts it right on the grid. If you hold down Alt and Shift, you can cut off the grid. So by default, you can only cut on the grid, right? You see how it's just snapping to the grid? But then if you hold Alt, you can go in between the grid and you can slice it. If you hold down Alt in FL Studio with just about any parameter, it's going to take it off the grid. So that's cool. Now let's say that I want to slice this audio clip and I want to delete the smaller portion automatically without having to, slice it and then go back to the pen tool and then delete it. If I just wanted to do all of that in one step, instead of holding shift and left clicking like that, I hold shift and I right click and it deletes the smaller portion. Now, the reason why I say the smaller portion and not the right side of the clip is because if I were to hit Alt Shift right click on this left side, then it deletes the shorter part. You see what I mean? So basically it just deletes the shortest part of your audio. Okay, and while I'm going over that, this undo is Control Z, by the way. If you didn't know the Control Z option, that allows you to undo. And in FL Studio, I don't know if it's kind of different in every program, but in FL Studio, it'll go back and forth between your last undo and the previous state it was at. So if let's just make a bunch of edits. So I just made a bunch of edits, right? And if I hit Control Z, it's going to go back and forth between the first and the last edit that I did. But if I want to keep going back, then I have to hold Control Alt Z. And then as you can see right here, it's going to keep going all the way back. And then if I want to go forward again, then I keep hitting Control Z until it gets to the most recent edit. And then it'll start going back and forth between the last edit and the most current edit. That's how FL Studio works with undo. All right, so let's go up here and we've got this select tool. This is another one of the tools that can be done without actually clicking on the tool. So the select tool just basically gives you a lasso where you can select multiple things at the same time and highlight them. Now, if let's say we go to the pen tool, you can do the same thing with the pen tool by holding Control and clicking and dragging. So there's no need to go up here and click the select tool and select something. You can literally just Control, click, and drag, and it turns into the select tool. All right, and this zoom tool allows you to zoom in on a section. So let's say I want to zoom in on this section right here. It pulls it up. Okay, but it can be done without clicking it. So you can hit Control right click and drag, and it turns into the zoom tool. So Control right click and drag turns into the zoom tool. Control left click and drag turns into the select tool, right? And then if you want, let's say you're super zoomed in like this, and you want to zoom back out to the macroscopic level and look at the whole thing so you can zoom into a different section. I use this a lot because I'll be zoomed into this part and then I want to go to another part. So if you hit Control and just left click, then it zooms all the way out and you see the whole song again. And then you can go like zoom in on this part of the song and then Control right click and it zooms all the way out. Oh, and another thing that I use all the time for zooming in and out is if you hold down Control and use the zoom wheel, then it zooms in horizontally, right? And then if you hold Alt and you scroll, then it zooms in vertically. And then if you hold down the middle click, if you hold down the scroll wheel, it'll give you this hand thing. And I use this all the time. I don't even think about it. It's probably the first thing I should have said in this video. So I'm zooming in, holding down Control, scroll, and then Alt, scroll, and then I'm moving it around, holding down the middle click option. And I can just like kind of thumb through the playlist while it's zoomed in. Okay, and this next thing is playback. It allows you to
Get that.
like if you click and hold onto an audio clip, it'll just loop that audio clip. like this.
Yeah, girl, give me that. Girl, give me that. Girl, I'm trying to hit that. I'm trying to hit that.
You know what I mean? So that could be helpful. I don't really use it a lot. Now, another thing that I wanted to note, because like there's nothing more annoying than, you know, you're in a workflow and you have to stop what you're doing and go up here and click the tool. You know, it's not conducive to a creative workflow. If you go up here and you hover your mouse over each tool, it has, if you look in the hint panel, it says P right over there. Like it says draw, and then to the right next to that little knob looking thing, it has a P, right? So that P is the shortcut for whenever you're in the playlist and you want to go to the pen tool, but B, like B is brush. So if I'm on the draw tool right now and I push B, then it goes to the brush tool. You know, and if I want to do the slice tool, I hit C. It's easy to remember because cut. I actually call it the cut tool because it's C. So, you know, I'm basically just switching between the cut tool, the pen tool, and the mute tool, which is T. If I go up here and I hover over mute, it says T. And those are basically the three tools that I switch between, and I never even click those tools up there. I'm either doing P, C, or T. If you want to select a group of things, you just hit Control, click, and drag. If you want to zoom in, it's Control, right click, and drag. You know, Control, click to zoom back out. And I also do the slip tool too. So you just hit S and then you can use the slip tool. Let's move on down here to the this little picker. So you've got three options at the top. You've got the patterns, you've got your audio clips, and you've got your automation clips. And this is where it just organizes them for you. This is where all your stuff is going to be at. So if you just want to like drag something in real quick, you can just click and drag that into there. And this is going to be all of your patterns that you create with your MIDI, and all of that is going to be in there. And your automation clips. It just organizes it for you, and it's easy to grab just right there. Okay, so this focus option for your audio. So by default, whenever you hover over an audio clip, you get this kind of double-sided arrow. And if you click and drag that, then you can like kind of widen this audio clip out, right? Even past the point where there's not even any more audio. And that's good, but let's say I wanted to take this audio clip and I wanted to stretch the audio. Let me just mute this for you so you can hear it.
Get that.
So it just says get that, right? So if I click the stretch option, now instead of just opening and closing the audio clip window, this will literally stretch the audio instead of just adjusting the size of the clip. So if I double this in size,
Get that.
and you can hear it stretch. If I double it again, here it is.
Get that.
So that's what stretch does. This Z crossing is short for zero crossing, and without getting too extremely technical, I guess I kind of have to describe this. Okay, so whenever you zoom in on a piece of audio, you'll see these little like waves, right? Obviously. The way audio works is there's a middle line where the speaker's not moving at all, and then it has a positive value and a negative value, and then the zero position is in the middle. It's the resting position. If you think about how a speaker moves, it goes out, in, and then the resting position is at zero. So a zero crossing point is literally where a piece of audio crosses the 0 point where the speaker is at rest, right? The reason why you might want to do this is because whenever you cut a piece of audio, if you tell a speaker to just stop immediately and it has to go from a positive or negative position all the way to 0 immediately, then it's going to produce a click, which isn't very pleasing whenever you're, you know, playing your music or whatever. You don't want to hear a bunch of clicks and pops. So a way to avoid that is if you're going to cut some audio, you should try and cut it on a 0 crossing point. That way it doesn't make your speakers pop. So that's what that option is for. So if I cut this audio, let's say just right here, it's gonna cut it as close to where I told it to cut it, but it's gonna move the cut position to where it's actually cutting at a 0 crossing point. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So this right here, see, so if I tell it to cut right here, Okay, that must have been on a 0 crossing point. Let's go to an obviously not 0 crossing point. Okay, you see, I told it to cut right here, but you can see it just cut just a little bit over, just right there. And what it did was it just jumped to the closest available 0 crossing point so that it doesn't clip the audio. Now, what I've done to mitigate that problem is, as you can see with these lines right here, you can go into, if you double click on your audio clip, you have these this declicking mode, and you've got these different options. And I've done this generic bleeding option, which allows you to, whenever you cut audio, it'll literally fade it out to 0. So you can make a cut wherever you want. And if you want it to literally cut exactly where you tell it to cut, and you don't want it to automatically jump, then you can use this option, which is helpful. And that's typically what I do to avoid clicks and pops. Okay, moving on. So that's the 0 crossing and the stretch. So let's move on to the focus options for your automation clips. Here we go. By default, you've got this slide option turned off, right? And then whenever you move a point in an automation, it doesn't affect anything else except for that one point that you're adjusting, right? Which is great, and I use that a lot. But let's say you want to move an automation but keep everything to the right of it exactly how it is. You can hit this slide button, and then everything to the right of the automation clip that you're adjusting, it'll slide with it, right? So that's why it's called slide. It'll just keep its position, and then you can just slide it to whatever you want to do. So that's the slide option. And then step editing will allow you to just hold, click and drag, and it'll just create a bunch of points. And then if you hold down Alt, so by default, it'll snap to the grid. But let's say you wanted to do like, a fluid thing like this, then you hold down Alt, and then you can just draw in your automation. So that's quick if you just want to draw in something real quick. By default, see, all of these are named and colored, but whenever you first open it up, it's just going to have these gray things that say like track 1, 2, and 3. What I like to do is I like to name my tracks and color code it to keep it as organized as possible, because these projects can get pretty messy pretty quick if you don't, keep things under control. So what you do to rename a track is you right click and you get all these options, and then you can rename, color, and everything. So you just give it its name, and if you click on this little arrow, looks like an arrow pointing to the left, then it'll give you this color wheel, and you can just click whatever color you want, and then it'll color it and name it for you, which is great. I think that's everything. Really, to summarize, whenever I'm in the playlist, I'm either using the pen tool with P, the cut tool with C, or mute tool with T. And then selecting multiple things, it's control click and drag. If you want to zoom in, control right click and drag, and then control click to zoom back out. And that's it. I mean, it's pretty simple stuff, but honestly, whenever I started using all of these things, it just totally improve my workflow. There's nothing that'll dry your inspiration out more than just having to do a bunch of repetitive tasks that are just so annoying. So if you can just find one button to click to get you exactly where you need to go, it's going to save you so much time, and it's going to save you so many headaches. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.